Jeff dug through his pockets for a bit. Beck took a long breath, then gave a firm nod. Chapter 4. Dinner with the Moodwills. Ilona Moodwill was worried about change. A gardener at heart, she understood the necessity of change, relied on it even. But there was a difference between the controlled world of her plants and this cluttered cottage in a strange town. Almost done. Nellie was a blur of activity, digging through boxes. Sorry, love, couldn't find the dishes. We'll have to make do with paper plates. Dinner went by without much conversation. As she watched Beck and Luca finish up their pizza, Ilona let herself relax into the chair. The things she cared about were still here. Nellie finally had the job of her dreams. Beck was beginning to take root. Ilona's task was simply to tend to them. She could do that. Luca's eyes were fixed to his plate, pushing a chunk of pineapple around with his finger. Nellie was the one who eventually broke the silence. Ilona nervously gestured toward the boxes. Luca wiped his face with his sleeve. Beck gave Luca a swift kick under the table. Luca glanced over to Beck. She seemed to be holding her breath. Beck slammed her fist into the table, perhaps harder than she intended. Luca glanced outside to gauge the time. The sky was darker than he expected, filled with ominous clouds. Luca wiped his mouth one last time with his napkin and started to get up. Surprised, Luca turned around. He knew Rollo could be prickly around new people. But Beck seemed cool. Rolla would warm up to her eventually. Probably. Luca began to respond, but the sky answered for him as the clouds above began to rumble with ominous thunder. Luca surveyed the roiling clouds. At that moment, the heavens opened up, unleashing torrential rain. Luca squinted into the eye hole of the microscope. Luca adjusted the slide with his fingers to get a better look. Luca wiped his hand off on his sweater and gave a nervous laugh. Beck looked down, timidly tapping the ladder with her feet. Luca flicked at one of the toggles. Luca bent down to examine the bouquet of wilting flowers. Judging by the odor, they were well past their prime. He flipped open the attached card. Beck took a moment to watch the rivulets of water running down the window. Luca took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. Luca let out a feral scream that echoed into the night. Her voice dropped to a trembling whisper. Beck brushed off her shirt and straightened up. As abruptly as it began, the storm abated. Beck gave Luca a light thump on the arm before heading in. Chapter 5. Friendly Feud. The air was heavy with the hard rain's residue. The smell of wet things. Despite his dreary surroundings, Luca felt at peace. He'd never shared those details about his dad with anyone. Not even Rollo. But it's not like this changed anything. Rollo was still his best friend. Adding Beck to the group would help balance things out. Everything's better in threes. This is what Luca told himself as he headed to the treehouse. Luca had only ever heard him speak in this stiff yet gentle tone a few times, and it always meant one thing. Rollo scoffed. Luca stumbled on his words, knowing he'd said too much. Luca became instinctively angry in response. Both boys were now shouting across the distance. Rollo's tone changed to a calm, yet more intense anger. The words hung in the cold night air. Rollo's stomach dropped, knowing he'd crossed a line. But it was too late. Luca dug through his old stuff, not even sure what he was looking for. Gran cooed gently from the hallway. Luca just wanted to be alone. He waited to hear the sound of the front door closing. Luca dozed off again. Luca still couldn't bring himself to go out. Besides, if he ran into Rollo, he'd have to actually confront the situation. The Adventures of Hank Atomic. Luca carefully opened the cover and began to read. Rollo had received it for his birthday. A special hardcover edition with behind-the-scenes commentary and bonus art. Rollo cherished it, but asked that Luca keep it at his house. Luca wasn't sure if it was because Rollo didn't trust himself with it, didn't trust his sister around it, or just wanted an excuse to come hang out at Luca's more often. Whatever the reason, Luca didn't mind, but it had stayed right there where Rollo had stashed it ever since. Now, at the foot of his bed, Luca lost himself in the pages. He'd read it all before, but at this moment, it somehow felt sentimental. He was well into issue number 5 when he heard soft footsteps from the hallway. Without realizing it, Luca had pouted away the entire afternoon. He once again felt the weight of it all and allowed his weary eyes to close. Luca stood in a vast black expanse. He looked up at his father standing beside him. Walt was working a straw at the bottom of a fountain glass, trying to collect the last bits of milkshake. Dad? Where are we? Taking a final loud gurgling sip, his father peered up from the glass. He jangled the straw playfully with a warm smile, then lifted the empty glass as if to point into the darkness. The source? Luca's eyes followed his father's gesture. In an instant, he was sitting in front of a blazing campfire. Across from him sat a large figure in a yellow hazmat suit. The figure's voice was a scratchy echo. Well, if it isn't the man of the hour. Make yourself comfortable. Luca held his shivering hands over the flame to warm himself. It doesn't work that way here. Their yellow-gloved hand pointed to the base of the flame. It's a cold flame, see? Luca peered at the base of the fire. It wasn't wood that was burning. It was Beacon Pines itself. Tiny buildings, freezing and crumbling as they were consumed by flame. Luca could see small shadows moving in the burning city. People. Luca leapt to his feet. We've got to help them! The figure gave a dismissive wave of their hand. Why waste energy helping people who can't even help themselves? The figure bent down to examine the panicked crowd as they desperately tried to stop the flames. They only care about what's right in front of them. Not like us. Luca's voice was a trembling whisper. Us? The figure slowly stood up, grabbing its helmet with both hands. With a jolt and a twist, the suit emitted a gasp. A cloud of torpid mist escaped, slowly revealing the face within. Luca's own face looked back at him, older, worn, distant. The sensation was oddly familiar, as if he'd caught his own reflection by surprise in the mirror. The doppelganger smiled. I tried to help once. He gestured towards his face. And all it got me was this. Luca staggered back. You aren't me. Luca felt a hand catch his shoulder. His father was there again, beside him. Every choice sets us on a path. This is the end of one of your paths, son. Luca watched his older self shake its head ruefully, its face twisting into a cruel grin. Welp, Dad, if you wanted him to see this, far be it from me to disappoint. Luca watched in shock as the figure took a confident step forward and plunged into the flames. In a flash of cold light, what does all of this mean? Luca felt a reassuring squeeze on his shoulder. Just remember, why we choose matters just as much as what we choose. Luca woke up to see a hazy figure at the foot of his bed, silhouetted in the morning sun. Luca rubbed his eyes. The kind, concerned face of his gran came into focus. Gran silenced Luca with a gentle pat on the leg. Luca gave a reluctant nod. Luca took a deep breath. Chapter 6. Through thick and thin. Despite Luca's bitterness, Gran was right. He needed to hash things out with Rollo. A big fight changes the nature of a friendship. Whether, in the end, it is for the better or for the worse, all comes down to understanding. If one is not careful, the same familiarity that builds the strongest of bonds can become the wrecking ball that shatters them. Luca emerged from seclusion, taking in the crisp festival air, but the events of the day weren't on his mind. He had to find Rollo. Luca began to respond, but the sky answered for him as the clouds above began to break, revealing patches of star-filled summer night. Moonlight filtered down, shimmering in the treetops. Luca stopped himself mid-sentence. Luca saw Beck skulking by the gate. grabbed the wrought iron bars and shook the gate. Beck's voice was an excited whisper. The mysterious figure retracted their mask, hair pushing out from all corners. A chill ran down Luca's spine. His vision blurred. Beck stifled a sharp wince, and Luca looked down to see himself wrenching her hand. Gran tousled her hair back under the face mask. Gran gave Eris a curt nod and disappeared into the night. Chapter 5. What big ears you have! Lucas sat shivering in the bushes, staring at his feet. After checking to make sure the coast was clear, Beck gave him a gentle tug on his sweater. The clipboard finished writing with a scratchy flourish and looked up. Mr. Nuncreed, arms crossed over his paunch, gave an exhausted sigh. He snatched the pad and scribbled his name so hard the pen nearly snapped. The clipboards looked at each other for a moment, almost pondering the possibility. Then broke into laughter as they walked away. William Kerr and Gus Valentine proudly surveyed the half-covered festival banner. The mayor gave a half-hearted shrug. Connor lopped his arm on Gus's shoulder. With a glimmer in his eye, Kurt gestured grandly toward the horizon. Rollo waggled his head with pride. sucked in a long breath. Rollo let out a low whistle. Rollo and Luca shot back a look. Luca gazed out the window. Chapter 6: Secret Lair. Summer forged ahead, but the nights only seemed to grow colder. Luca walked home slowly under the pale starlight, cautious to avoid any more surprises lurking in the shadows. Reaching home, he slipped quietly into bed, half dreading what they might discover the next day. Luca and Beck rolled their eyes as Rollo strutted across the room. Rollo flung open the cabinet with confidence. He coughed as a veil of dust hit his face. A look of realization crept onto Luca's face. All three kids snapped to glance at each other, then sprinted in turn toward the kitchen. Before he could finish, Luca scrambled up Rollo's back. The three crowded around the hutch to peer in. With the glass doors opened, a perfect porcelain display gleamed in front of them. Their eyes searched for anything amiss. But the only distinct feature was its impeccability. As Beck pulled on one of the teacups, it slanted forward with a hollow click. The entire hutch began to rustle and slide under its own power. Luca jostled each cabinet drawer in turn. Only one was unlocked. He fingered through the filing cabinet, pausing at a bulging folder labeled Walter. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Luca nodded and caressed the label with his thumb. Rollo swiped the folder from the drawer and began leafing through the pages. He whistled to himself, barely looking at the text. He stopped at a page and mimed, holding up a monocle. Rollo looked up with heightened surprise. Rollo's finger traced across the page. Rollo scanned through several more pages. Luca, staring blankly at the cabinet this whole time. Rollo rustled the folder, trying to loose more pages. Luca frantically shoved the remaining cabinet folders, trying to find another labeled Walter. Luca slammed the drawer shut. A spider web of string connected photos of people from the town, interspersed with hastily scrawled notes. Rollo casually spun open a lid and dipped his finger in the jam. He smacked his lips. Rollo plunged his hand in the jar, fishing out a soggy slip of paper. Rollo offered the slimy note to Luca and licked his fingers clean. They crowded around a worn-down old map of Beacon Pines. Rollo carefully traced the path with his finger. He jabbed down at the end point. Luca looked up from Beck flicked off the light, and they became statues in the dark. Overhead, creaking floorboards bent under slow, deliberate steps. The kids looked up, the tilt of their necks following each footfall. Then suddenly, it stopped. Without realizing, they'd been holding their breath. All three exhaled shakily and glanced at each other. A muffled male voice broke the silence. A final few footsteps reached the entrance above them, and the voice now echoed down the stairs. The three kids shuffled to the corners without a peep. As he began to descend the stairs, the man's voice punctuated every new step. Thump. 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 At the bottom step, the man paused, squinting to search the room for signs of life. Rollo shifted suddenly. Luca gave him an intense, chastising look and whispered through clenched teeth. It was too late. Rollo was already inching toward the stairway. He screeched as he charged toward the shadowy figure. With all his weight, Rollo tackled the man to the ground. From the dark corner, they saw something move. Luca scrambled to the hunched figure on the ground. Pressing his fingers to the man's neck, he sighed with relief. As Beck flicked back on the light, Luca and Rollo both gasped in stereo. Chapter 7. The Interrogation of Hiram Tolliver. Still unconscious, Mr. Tolliver slumped heavily in a shoddy old chair. His hands were bound with rope, his feet tied with some loose string. The kids huddled in a circle, discussing their plan. One thing was certain, they couldn't just let Mr. Tolliver go. They needed to know what he was doing in Luca's house. After some deliberation, it was decided. They'd run the classic good cop, chill cop interrogation. Luca walked calmly to the light switch, flicking it off and on a few times. Mr. Tolliver shook his head, gathering his wits. He looked over to find Luca, who returned a calming grin. Rollo and Beck emerged from hiding to give a timid wave. Luca glanced over to Rollo and Beck, who replied with skeptical looks. Mr. Tolliver exhaled with disappointment. Luca gestured to the corner. Luca looked again to Rollo and Beck. This time they shrugged. Luca began to slowly loosen the bindings. Mr. Tolliver gently rubbed his wrists. He edged imperceptibly toward the stairs as he spoke. Before the kids had even noticed his movement, Mr. Tolliver was at the light switch. He punctuated his final words by flicking the switch and rushing up the stairs. Beck darted to the wall and turned back on the lights. It was too late. Rollo confirmed what they all heard. Mr. Tolliver's muffled voice came from behind the door. They looked bewildered at each other. They heard the staccato thump of quick steps exiting the house. The kids looked down in resignation. This isn't how it goes in Hank Atomic. For some reason, they'd always assumed it was up to them to save their town. Luca opened his mouth, hoping to conjure some magical words to make this right. Only a hollow croak escaped. The end. Well, we certainly aren't going to find a grand resolution to our tale locked in a back to the drawing board. Chapter 6. Through thick and thin. Despite Luca's bitterness, Gran was right. He needed to hash things out with Rollo. A big fight changes the nature of a friendship. Whether, in the end, it is for the better or for the worse, all comes down to understand. If one is not careful, the same familiarity that builds the strongest of bonds can become the wrecking ball that shatters them. Luca emerged from seclusion, taking in the crisp festival air. But the events of the day weren't on his mind. He had to find Rollo. Roxy rolled her eyes, shaking her head. Luca looked down and kicked at the dirt. Mr. Kerr pointed to his grinning mouth. Jeff was staring into the distance with a wistful look. Jeff turned to Luca with a furrowed brow, then gave an understanding nod. For a moment, the two now shared that same wistful gaze. Griffin looked away suspiciously. Kato's eyes lit with excitement. Kato straightened up and cleared his throat as if preparing to sing. Kato stared at Luca eagerly. Luca grabbed the modern science of atomic... Luca grabbed the Adventures of Hank Atomic, issue number... Kato removed his book from the desk and replaced it with Luca's, turning on the lamp. As he slid the book under the purple light, 2 words glowed: The Adventures of Hank Atomic, issue 5. Luca clicked his tongue with recognition. Kato began flipping through the pages, stopping when he hit a glowing word. He continued flipping. Reaching the end of the book, Kato looked up. Before Luca could finish his sentence, Griffin handed him a corn dog. Luca shrugged, taking a sizable bite out of the corn dog. Luca tongued at his cheeks, feeling something rough between his teeth. He reached into his mouth and pulled out a slip of paper. He shook off the bits of corn dog to read the slip. Luca finished off the remainder of the corn dog. Lumi waved his hands around sarcastically as he began. Rollo sheepishly handed Luca the balloons. Luca threw himself at Rollo, hugging him as tightly as he could. Rollo handed Luca an unopened letter. Luca, some things are going to happen that might be difficult for you to understand. If I am honest, I hardly understand them myself, but whatever happens, I need you to know that I love you. None of this is fair to you. You have already lost so much. We both have. I wish there was a simpler way forward. But if there is, I haven't thought of it. God knows I've tried. Everything I've done. I hope someday you can accept that. Love, Gran. Luca folded the paper into his pocket and headed up the ladder. Luca was at a loss for words, but that was fine. Words aren't always necessary. Sadly, this was untrue. A distant rumble shook the treehouse. It was not fireworks. It was something the boys couldn't possibly comprehend, something as old and cruel as time itself. A shockwave of cold tore through the room. A bitter, unfathomable chill. Before they could react, it encased them in ice. Two boys, reunited by friendship, only to be cruelly separated by a malevolence beyond reason. And so, our story ends on this melancholy scene. In a silent treehouse turned statuary, in a town brought low by its secrets, sits a pair of friends, alone, together, for the rest of time. The end. No, that can't be the ending. It simply can't. I won't accept it, and I hope you won't either. There are more endings, more possibilities. I can feel it. We are just going to have to sort through them all until we find the one that fits. Luca drew himself up and decided to take the only option they had. He squinted down the barrel of the mission control defense cannon, aiming it through an opening in the dense tree branches. He looked up with surprise as it struck true and taut. Luca and Iggy winced as they sprinted through the thicket. The branches clawed at them, reluctant to give passage. After what felt like a marathon, Luca stopped in his tracks as they reached the clearing. What the? That was all he was able to say before Iggy slammed into his back. The boys tumbled down a steep decline and crashed with a wheezing thud on a surface as hard as ice. In fact, it was ice. Chapter 5. Signs. They stood silently, catching their breath. The sky was like sapphire. With each breath, a plume of steam escaped from Luca's lungs. Let's keep moving. Luca pulled Iggy to his feet as they gazed across a snowy terrain. A disc of smooth metal was lightly covered in snow. Two faint seams were visible along the surface. Luca had almost forgotten the walkie-talkie he was carrying. Luca looked at Iggy with hesitation. With a resigned sigh, Luca responded. Luca winced, shoving the walkie-talkie back into his pocket. disbelief at the sign that now clearly read, "Welcome to Beacon Pines." The fencing glistened, each chain link encapsulated with a translucent layer of ice. Looking down at the frozen stream, Luca could faintly see a school of minnows encased in the ice. The crunching of footsteps trailing Luca went hush. He looked back to see Iggy's face twisted with confusion. Luca peered upward at the darkening sky. He let out a long, foggy breath. Faintly, Iggy began to cry. Seeing Iggy in such a pathetic state gave Luca a sense of compassion, and more than a little guilt. Luca allowed himself to collapse next to Iggy. The boys huddled together for warmth and comfort. If not for exhaustion, their minds would be racing, trying to make sense of the events of the day. As it was, all they had energy for was to sit in silence, numb. Iggy motioned sarcastically to his half-deformed face. Iggy shrugged. Iggy now wept. He wiped his nose with a sleeve. Luca gave a warm chuckle. Iggy cleared his throat as he wiped his eyes. Iggy arched into a wide yawn. Luca's eyelids began to slowly drift shut. That's all Luca could whisper before succumbing to sleep. Iggy snuggled in some more. The house smelled of warm bread. Luca was playing with toy blocks on the living room rug. He looked up to see his parents on the couch. His mother held his father's head in her lap. She idly stroked his hair while humming a song. A voice behind Luca spoke. "This is how you remember them, huh?" Luca turned to see his own face. The doppelganger from his dreams, still clad in a yellow hazmat suit, still carrying a look of disdain behind empty eyes. Aww, look at this perfectly cozy scene. You know it wasn't really like this. The figure picked up a toy block and inspected it. It's amazing the facades that one can build given the right materials. Not that I blame us. These are a child's memories, all warm and fuzzy. You don't remember, do you? Luca snatched the block from the figure's yellow-gloved hand. Remember what? The doppelganger pointed to the couch. The last day we saw him alive. The day he chose to abandon us. Luca turned to look at his father, still lounging on the couch. That's not true. He didn't abandon us. The doppelganger waved his hand dismissively. Everything is true here. It's just a matter of what we choose to see. Let me show you. The world flickered and pulsed. Luca was sitting next to his bed, listening to his heartbeat with one of his dad's stethoscopes. The doppelganger limped into the room. No, we both know that's not how this went. He grabbed Luca's hand and guided the stethoscope to the floor. Luca heard muffled shouting, brought close by the stethoscope. It was his parents, fighting. Do you remember what we did next? Luca gave a slow nod and crept down the hall to peek through the banister. He could see the outline of his mother at the bottom of the stairs. Damn it, Walt. We can't afford to get involved in this. She was scared. His father stepped forward. What am I supposed to do? Just watch? There's a sickness in this town, and we both know who's behind it. I swore an oath to help people. I won't turn my back on them. Luca's mother grabbed Walt. She was crying, pleading. I can't lose you. Walt calmly removed Eleanor's hand from his shoulder. What's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. I could never live with myself if I let Sharper get away with this. Eleanor raised her voice. Spare me your bullshit platitudes. What about our son? Luca flinched, dropping the stethoscope down the stairs. Walt turned with a panicked smile. Luca, is that you, buddy? With tears in his eyes, Luca descended the stairs. Mom? Dad? What's going on? Walt dropped to a knee to meet Luca eye to eye. Nothing, buckaroo. Your mom and I just got a little overexcited is all. Luca placed the stethoscope against his father's chest. His heart was racing. It sounded like you were going somewhere? Walt gently removed the device from Luca's ears. Listen to me, Luca. I have some business to take care of. I'll be back in time to tuck you in. Luca hugged his father tightly. Promise? Walt stood up and walked to the door. He glanced over his shoulder. I promise. With a wink and a grin, he put on his hat and strode out into the evening sun. A figure approached soundlessly from the foggy snowfall. It stood above them, lingering in contemplation. Slowly raising one hand above Iggy, it snapped out 2 brisk raps on his head. From a deep slumber, Iggy sprang up defensively. Whether it was the calming presence or the recognition that he was not in danger, Iggy felt his clenched fists lower. Luca looked up, gradually remembering his whereabouts. The figure exhaled a cloud of warm vapor. When it came to complete strangers, Iggy had trouble cobbling together an insult. Iggy huffed with gratification. Nat began to turn away indifferently. Iggy turned sharply and began to stomp off. Realizing he'd worn their patience thin, Nat relented. Luca and Iggy turned around with hope in their eyes. Nat took a deep breath in. Nat exhaled slowly, then snapped his fingers. For a brief moment, Luca and Iggy let themselves believe that some great magic was about to unfold, until they opened their eyes and found themselves in the exact same place, cold and disheartened. Luca and Iggy looked around uncomfortably. Nat narrowed his eyes, furrowed his brow, and uttered. Luca began to laugh uncomfortably. He looked down at his feet. His eyes started back and forth in contemplation. With a sudden pain, a thought struck him. He sprinted off into the pale distance. As Iggy turned to follow, Nat called out. Chapter 6. The Source. Nat expressed his sympathy with a shrug and sauntered off as unassumingly as he'd arrived. He'd given Luca and Iggy what they needed, and nothing more. As Luca sprinted across the snow, the events of the past few days became clearer, pieces to a larger puzzle. Rollo said he was underground somewhere, captured. Mr. Kerr tried to cover it up with lies. The Clipworths were hell-bent on capturing Iggy. It all seemed to point to Perennial Harvest. But right now, there was one thing that Luca needed to know. Luca stopped dead in his tracks. The tree was gone, uprooted and moved, leaving a raw gash in the earth. He dropped to his knees and dug wildly at the cold snow. His numb hands hit something hard. A dry whisper escaped Luca's lips. There was no reply, just snow-covered silence. Iggy finally noticed the tears welling in Luca's eyes and the snow-covered grave. Suddenly, they heard the crunch of approaching footsteps in the snow. He bent down to scoop up a snowball and lobbed it playfully. Luca stuttered through heaving sobs. Iggy gave Luca a solid smack on the back of his head. Luca wiped his eyes with a sleeve. Iggy flashed a mischievous smile and cracked his knuckles. Iggy and Luca shared a skeptical look. Iggy darted behind a large pine and began digging furiously. He emerged holding a shoebox with a crude skull painted on its lid. Luca rolled his eyes with realization. Iggy stifled a chuckle. Iggy triumphantly raised the shoebox. Luca and Iggy inched up to the edge of the hole with bewilderment in their eyes. Arctic air breathed out of the cavern in heaving gusts. Mr. Kerr gazed down the abyss in contemplation. Kerr scratched the back of his head. His face contorted into a saccharine grin. Kerr snapped his fingers. Iggy turned to Luca with a sly glance. Iggy waved the box into the air, threatening to drop it down the hole. Iggy plucked a single bottle rocket from the box and held it up with reverence. After a long pause, Mr. Kerr flung up his hand with frustration. Mr. Kerr sighed into the frigid air. With a nonchalant flick, Iggy tossed the firework into the hole. With a growl, Kerr leapt at Iggy. Iggy tried to twist away, but in the struggle they both tumbled over the side. Luca dove forward, bracing Iggy's hand just before it slipped. His grip was made precarious by the cold, wet snow. He could see Kerr further down, clinging to Iggy's coat. Mr. Kerr gasped with insult. With a wild look in his eye, Mr. Kerr began to hum a proud melody. Luca's hand began to cramp. His voice began to crack. Luca felt Iggy loosen his grasp. Every muscle in Luca's body burned. Luca felt his hand slipping. A calm settled over Iggy's face. Iggy's voice was colder than the bitter air billowing from the chasm. Luca had no choice but to refuse Iggy's request. He tightened his grip and reached for the walkie-talkie in his pocket. A wild delight crept onto Mr. Kerr's face. "That's a good lad. Now, radio for help." Iggy begged Luca with his eyes one last time, but Luca pressed the button and called out, We need help. Mr. Kerr is in danger." It wasn't long before they were once again surrounded by clipboards. Mr. Kerr sighed with relieved frustration. There you are. You really are a worthless lot, aren't you? Mirror. Now. A clipboard dutifully produced an ornate ivory hand mirror, and Mr. Kerr began preening his tousled hair. Ah, that's better. Mr. Van Horn, I applaud your sharp thinking under duress. I'll put in a good word for you with the founder. Take them away. A swarm of hands overpowered Luca. The last thing he saw before a cloth bag was pulled over his head was the defeated look on Iggy's face. The end. I think this was one of those times where doing the right thing was the wrong. Luca had no choice but to accept Iggy's request. With a quiet blink, Luca watched a teardrop sail down into the howling void. As his fingers slowly gave up, he met eyes with Iggy. The two silhouettes were swallowed by darkness. We have some idea what that would look like. A fierce twinkle flashed in Nat's eyes. With a chuckle, Nat turned and walked west. Dumbfounded, Luca followed behind him, trudging through the snow. Every step taking him further away from everyone and everything he knew, and closer to destiny. To be continued in Beacon Pines, Pines Harder. Revenge served cold. Second time's a charm? Wait, that's it? This ends with a crummy cliffhanger just when it was getting good? I was even starting to like Iggy. No way. I refuse to be associated with some never-ending parade of sequels. Let's go back and find something more definitive. They'd run the classic good cop, hard cop interrogation. Rollo brandished a steely gaze. I've got this. Read about it 100. Rollo swaggered past the chair which propped up the slumping Hiram Tolliver. Without even looking at his captive, he began with a long, blustery drawl. Mr. Tolliver remained motionless. Rollo spun around to face him. He'd clearly expected to rouse Mr. Tolliver with his booming voice. Beck and Luca gave each other an unsure glance. Rollo slammed his fist on the table. He grabbed the table lamp and beamed it onto the unconscious face. Mr. Tolliver groaned and slowly lifted his head. He recoiled with a muddled, weary squint. The chair wobbled as he attempted to straighten up. Mr. Tolliver could only make out rough shapes through the glaring light. With a gruff tone, Rollo hoped to both conceal his voice and intimidate. The doubtful expression on Beck and Luca's faces transformed into awe. Rollo, hitting his stride, was now channeling every detective trope his memory could recall. He slammed the table again. Mr. Tolliver's voice became desperate. He was nearly in tears. Mr. Tolliver was in a daze, now more confused than ever. He shook his head, feeling more and more dizzy. His voice faded to a whisper. With that, Mr. Tolliver passed out cold. Rollo swung around with a repentant grimace. Chapter 8. 6 feet under, 3 towns over.